My guest today is a well-known, and I'm going to say this unabashedly, a well-known Canadian hero. He was born in Port Alberni and raised in Williams Lake with a few stops in between, I believe. Believe it or not, 40 years ago, he staged a worldwide event that caught the attention of millions around the world. It was dubbed the Man in Motion Marathon. And as you might know by now, I'm talking to Rick Hansen, and it is a pleasure for me. And Rick has claimed, and deservedly so, an armful of awards, citations, medals. At the same time, became known for his endurance, his philanthropy, athleticism, and achievements beyond all that. So I'm pleased to have him here on the podcast with me now. Thanks for being with us, Rick. It's good to see you.
Hey, thanks, Tony. Great to see you too.
Let's go back to the very beginning. Can you describe for me your growing up in Williams Lake? What kind of a kid were you?
Yeah, well, my earliest memories when I was raised up in the early days in Port Alberni was always on an adventure. I had the most idyllic life as a kid because we had this family compound, on the banks of a creek, and my grandfather was just like 100 feet up the hill, and my uncle and aunts and cousins were right beside us, and it was always surrounded by family, always on an adventure, whether it be the outdoors, camping, fishing, hiking. And, they say that character is often formed in the first 6 years of life. And if that's true, I was well on the way by the time I turned 6. I felt very blessed.
I know you were a fishing enthusiast. Was that from your childhood?
Yes, I think one of my earliest memories was like with a fishing rod in my hand, going down to that little creek just down below us from where we lived, and trying to catch fish, or going on adventures to like places like little mysterious lakes that my dad would build up in my mind, and we'd kind of come through the bushes, in the early dawn, and and it was like mist coming off the lake, and there was a big rooted tree that had fallen into the lake, and he had walked out earlier and had nailed a piece of plywood at the end out in the water. And I'll never forget actually being there with my dad, and I got so scared about going out onto that platform, and he said, "Don't worry, son, I've got you." And as we cruised along, I slipped a bit, and he grabbed me and kept me on that log, and then we got out onto the platform. We were catching fish and having a great time. And then by the time it was time to turn around, and go back to shore, I felt so confident that I actually walked all by myself back to shore. And, it was just, that was kind of life back then. And, I just loved it. And whether it was out on the West Coast fishing salmon or in the interior, it was just in my blood. And I couldn't wait for the next adventure.
And the words pro athlete come up in your resume. Were you longing to be a pro athlete sometime down the road?
My whole life seemed to be revolving around physical activity, sport, and the use of my legs. And, I truly did have, big aspirations in my mind as a young kid. I think I was a pretty good athlete. I don't know if I was great, but I had these, goals of maybe playing volleyball, and that was my real favorite sport. And my coach was really encouraging me, and I had been selected to try out for the provincial volleyball team, and I couldn't wait to be part of that. But then things kind of changed.
That change had to do with fishing. You had been on a fishing trip with your buddy Don Alder?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, Don Alder and Randy Brink were, basketball and volleyball teammates, and I'd planned this great adventure after we graduated from grade 10. We'd go on an amazing fishing trip from Williams Lake west to the Chilcotin Plains, to a place called Clean, where his family had a ranch, and then from there down into the Bella Coola Valley on the west coast, and fish salmon. And this idyllic adventure was perfect until we were coming back home, And Don and I left Randy at his ranch. And instead of waiting for his dad to take us the next day, we were so excited to get back to the Williams Lake Stampede. We decided to hitchhike, and we ended up getting to ride in the back of a pickup truck with the fellow who unfortunately rolled the truck, and it crashed and broke my back and damaged my spinal cord. And then I was told I'd never walk again.
How did you cope after that? What was going through your mind?
It was pretty devastating, Tony. I mean, as a kid where you're completely defined by your physicality, the ability to get out into the outdoors and, and go on amazing adventures that required everything to do with the use of your legs, then all of a sudden someone tells you you'll never walk again. And I had no idea, this is pre-information age, of course, and no idea of anyone with a disability, seriously. And so I thought all of my hopes and dreams had been shattered along with my spine, and couldn't imagine. I was filled with despair and, a lot of anger. At first I tried blaming the driver, and then I tried to blame my body for not healing. And then eventually I had to accept some responsibility that, that, hey, I got in the back of that truck, when I wasn't supposed to. And, my body tried its best. Now the question was, is there a life? And, that was a pretty dark period, especially when you're in the hospital for basically 2 full months in the hospital and then 2 months in the rehabilitation center. And you have to start to try to figure out what life might be like, if possible, going forward.
You must have had someone behind you encouraging you. Was it the coach you mentioned?
Oh my gosh. I had so many amazing, my family, of course, were there. Like my dad, took time off of his job, and they came down to the coast while I was in the hospital and in the rehab center. And my uncle and aunt put me up, when I was able to go back and do a little, day trip to try to, get a little baby step forward. But, my coach, Bob Redford, he was there for me, all the way along. And yet it took somebody who was so instrumental, a guy who had had a spinal cord injury, who had been injured in the late 1930s at a time when people with spinal cord injury were not supposed to survive. His name was Stan Strong. He was a policeman, and he was driving through Stanley Park one day during a windstorm, and a tree fell down on his car and broke his back. And back then he wasn't supposed to survive, but yet he did, and he became a peer counselor. And little did I know, he was also a manager of an unknown wheelchair basketball team called the Vancouver Cable Cars. And he came into my life with this big smile on his face, and he was telling me about what life could be like. And he was infectious, his attitude. And he told me about wheelchair sport, and I still didn't really understand it much, but he tried to recruit me onto this cable cars team. But it was my coach, Bob Redford, that made me realize, when we were having a chat in the gym after a practice, when I went back home, and he said, "What do you want to do?" And I told him, "I don't know." And he said, "Do you love sports?" And yeah. He said, "Well, why don't you get involved in Paralympic sports?" And I said, I don't know. That's recreation." And he goes, "No, they're athletes." He said, "There's nowhere in the definition an athlete that says you have to use your legs in order to be one." And then I started thinking, well, maybe I should go out and give it a try. And so Stan got me down to the first practice. So I drove all the way down from Williams Lake to Vancouver and got into the gym thinking I was like this pretty hot athlete, or used to be. And and it's going to be pretty much of a cakewalk here. And I looked at the gym, and these athletes were just like incredible. Like Eugene Reimer, Canada's Outstanding Male Athlete of the Year in '72 with Karen Magnuson, Peter Calistro, one of the world's best wheelchair basketball players on the planet. And they were just wheeling circles around me. And I went, oh my God, Bob Redford was right. They're incredible athletes. I better get going. Yeah, I was inspired, and it was really exciting. It was a great period for me to be able to be introduced to this incredible new beginning.
Yes, you did get going. But there's one thing I want to ask you about was a project you undertook, and it had to do with, I'm told, rubber bands. What the heck was that all about?
Well, actually, what was really it was sort of like a defining moment, in my early, period when I was in the hospital, and I was in this situation where, the doctors told me that I might have some secondary complications, and my stomach and my digestive system might shut down, and sure enough, about a week into this whole thing, I ended up starting to feel like really sick, got a fever and headache, and I was flipped face down. And it was 2 a.m. on the striker bed that flipped forward. 3 hours you're in the upward position, they roll you, and now you're 3 hours in a downward position. They just kept flipping, every 3 hours, and it was that way for almost 2 months. And this one time I was face down, and it was 2 a.m. and I was going to get sick, and I pushed the call button for the nurse to come, and I guess they missed the call light, and there were a shift change, and so I threw up, and I was just sitting there, like looking at this, contemplating my reality, feeling the lowest of lows, and truly, I couldn't imagine why I should continue. It was the most devastating period of my entire journey, during that period. And the next morning, they cleaned me up, and gave me something for the nausea and the pain, and I sort of had this moment of, like, in this despair, the little voice in your head says, so now what? And I went, oh God, like, what? What do you mean what? I'm sitting here like in this ridiculous, helpless place. And then I just decided, well, you must be able to do something. And I went, yeah, hang on, I can still move my arms. And so I asked a physiotherapist to bring a set of rubber bands and put them on the side of my bed, my hospital bed, so I could actually do a little exercise with my arms, because they were getting weak. I was getting weak, and it was incredible what happened. That in that moment, it made me realize that, as dark as it is, there must be something I can still do. And so I started a little bit more of that shift from the helplessness, the pain and despair, and I started focusing on ability and what I could do, not what I couldn't do. And that little baby step really set a mindset. And then when I met people like Stan Strong and Peter Calistro and Eugene Reimer, it kind of extended my life and my view of what was possible, which transformed the rubber band theory into the theory of almost anything, because anything was possible by that point.
Something else that you made possible was your phys ed degree. You were first, they resisted, first of all, that they didn't know that you could do it, or they didn't know that you'd be recognized as a phys ed guy if you had this affliction that was obvious. But you went through with it, and you conquered that whole thing.
Well, yeah, I did, but again, back to role models and influencers. Bob Redford, who was my teacher, my basketball, volleyball coach, when he was having one of those side chats, as he often did during my grade 11 and 12 year, living with this profound challenge, trying to offer me hope and inspiration, populate that dark canvas into points of light and color and texture. He asked, so what are you going to do when you graduate? And I said, well, I don't know, like maybe get a job on a desk somewhere here in Williams Lake. He said, well, Rick, what did you want to do before your injury? I said, well, I wanted to be a phys ed teacher and a coach, just like you. And he said, well, like, then why can't you? And I, he had introduced me to being a substitute teacher. a coach, for an elementary school team. He had introduced me to being an assistant coach, in the high school team. And he said, Rick, like teachers and coaches, they don't have to demonstrate everything. They just have to be a good human who understands what the subject is and figure out how to actually inspire and motivate and educate. And so why don't you apply? Go to phys ed and at UBC. And I said, okay. He inspired me, so I did, and then waited anxiously, and the letter came back, and I brought it in. I was really devastated, and they had rejected me, and they said, "Dear Mr. Hansen, I'm sorry, we can't accept you. At this time, we recommend that perhaps you take first year arts and science, and then we'll continue the conversation. But sorry, we can't at this point." And I was just like, the rejection was really tough, and I was gonna like, okay, I'm right. I'll just go and get a job here and do whatever. And he said, Rick, don't see it as a rejection. See it, from their perspective. They've never had anybody with a disability, or especially in a wheelchair, there before. They don't know who you are. They're maybe open to accepting precedent, but you got to show them that you're a good bet, because it's not just about you. It's about opening the door for others and a mindset shift. So go down there, take first year arts and sciences, and meet them and show them who you are and convince them that you're the right choice. And I like, it was like amazing. So I did, and I managed to meet with them many times, and then out to the end of my first year, the key principal there, Dr. Bob Schutz, he said, "I want to meet with you." And he said, I came in and he said, "Rick, the school of phys ed has, addressed your request, and want to inform you that we've accepted you into this, the faculty of school, and on one condition." I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Well, obviously your first year marks have to be okay." And I went, "Oh, geez, I forgot about that. I was so busy having a great time in my first year." But fortunately, they were just enough to get in, and I was accepted, and that was awesome.
Well, you went on to win 6 Paralympic medals. That's no small feat. I mean, that was quite an accomplishment. Was there a particular race or victory that stands out most as meaningful to you?
I think the most culminating victory for me, because I had graduated and evolved into wheelchair marathoning, and I'd really put everything into it. And I'd had this I crashed testing a new chair, and I dislocated my left shoulder. And that's where I was, introduced to my physio, who became my wife, Amanda, and she helped my shoulder become rehabilitated and got me back to, representing Canada just in time for, the Paralympic Games in Stoke Mandeville, England. And it was the first time they'd included wheelchair marathon in the Paralympic Games, and it was an open marathon. And when coming into that event, I was still not sure about how much my shoulder could take, because the time frame was so tight. I'd never actually wheeled the 40-kilometer distance in the rehab process, so it was probably technically about 3 months early. But I thought, let's go for it. And at the end, I managed to just finish by about 100th of a second ahead of the number 2 competitor, Mel Fitzgerald from Canada. And being up on the podium with Mel, myself, and a good friend and competitor, Andre Vigier from Quebec, having 3 Canadians on the podium of this inaugural Paralympic marathon, and feeling like I was the luckiest guy on the planet, and kind of reflecting back a decade earlier when I was, laying on the side of the road, propped up against a steel toolbox, thinking my life was over, and how far I'd come, and anything, I really felt like I was whole, and that I was like just excited about the future, but so grateful, because, you recognize, you stand there on the backs of, or sit there in the backs of all these people who kind of kept challenging me or supporting me
Mm.
to just keep going and believe in myself.
And you did.
Well, I guess I did, but also at that moment, it makes you realize too that like Stan said, it's not just about taking from the team. What can you do to pay it forward? And what I did in that first stage is I went out and looked for recruits, because that's what he wanted me to do, is to build the
Mm.
team. And a friend told me about this guy from SFU who had been on the JV basketball team, and he had lost his leg to cancer, and I should meet him. And I said, yeah, for sure. Give me his number. I called him up, and his name was Terry Fox, and he was struggling. And I said, you don't know me, I'm Rick Hansen. How about coming out on playing on our wheelchair basketball team? And he goes, yeah, I'd love to. And so he hopped into the gym, still on chemotherapy, and got into a chair, and he was pretty weak and, not very skilled at that point in wheelchair basketball, but you could see his intensity and his general basketball skills. And we became great friends and teammates, and that paying it forward mentality had been, infused. So both Terry and I were so incredibly influenced by Stan Strong, the team manager, and I think our mutual experience with this dream team kind of infused in both of us that spirit of, well, what can we do to make a difference and help out and use our experiences and our talents to be able to help others who maybe were suffering and it shouldn't be there. And so Terry, of course, ended up embarking on his marathon of hope and inspired a nation and a world. And he inspired me as a friend. And and I'd been thinking about a crazy dream of wheeling around the world, but at that time it was more like an adventure, but between Stan and Terry, I started putting the dots together and thinking, if I could really make a difference, it would be to, wheel around the world and show the potential of people with disabilities if barriers were removed. So that was the beginning of the Man in Motion World Tour dream. But if I didn't have that experience with those guys, at that time, who knows what my future would have held.
Well, it's been 40 years since you first set out on that journey.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to imagine, because I was there when you started out. And
I sure appreciate you being there. There weren't many, and thanks for believing in me, Tony. That was awesome. That cold March morning.
It was. I remember that. But it was a big story for us. You were amazing.
Yeah, right. Yeah, as we wheeled out the parking lot, and the motorhome crashed into the top of the tunnel.
Oh yes, I remember that.
My wheelchair scattered all over the parking lot. Yeah, he'll be back.
That's one of your memories. What are some of the other memories of that marathon?
The memories are that first day was probably the greatest accomplishment of our whole tour. Because the dream was so big and the forces were so powerful to not start. And we were unorganized. We were I was still nursing an old injury, and I was really, filled with self-doubt, but, having that small group of people, including yourself, who believed in me, and having my team behind me who had worked so hard just to get to this moment, out you go. Right. And I guess it was the second day on the road, wheeling 113 kilometers a day with the wind and the rain, and now having an really an aggravating injury on my wrist and elbow. I kind of, to be honest, I thought about packing it up, and I Betty and Rolly Fox Terry's mom and dad gave me a miniature version of Terry's statue at Thunder Bay. And when we had the send off there at Oak Ridge, and I had it in the motorhome. And so when I went in, I had ice packs on my wrists, and it was I was still finished the first wheeling section. I'm injured. I look over at Terry's statue, and I remember a commitment I made. There's no shame in not finishing But if you're going to walk away from it, or if you can't continue, know that you have no regrets. And so going back and saying, I've got one more stroke left. Let's get out on the chair, take another stroke. That that was the defining moment for me, because that stroke led to literally another, you know, almost 80 kilometers and the end of the day, and it just kept unfolding. Memories of being able to see young kids with disabilities, like in Poland. Oh, this young man pushed himself on a piece of plywood with 4 skateboards and a pillow on the plywood, and he had gloves in his hands. He pushed himself with his hands. He was streaming tears of joy, looking up at me as the translator said, "Thank you. This is the first time that my family and my community have looked at me as a human with ability. I feel like I belong. Keep going." And that was an example when you're looking for the outcomes that are the fuel for why you're doing it, and it makes you realize, yeah, that was worth it. All of it was worth that one moment. And keep going. And going through China at a time when they weren't including any foreigners, and opening the doors, wheeling on the Great Wall, but going through Tianjin, where 250,000 people showed up, to see if it was true, if a person with a disability could be moving from being a shut-in, a ward of state, a burden on family, to a leader, and to be able to contribute. I mean, those are really powerful moments for me, and it set the tone for what I would have hoped would be a return home to Canada. But boy, there was still a lot of ground between then.
Mm. What a great experience for you, and it had a personal effect on you, I know. But in the meantime, you raised $26 million. It was
Yeah,
amazing.
who would have amazed? We thought we would raise. We started off with a goal of $1 million, because fundraising was the secondary part of the journey. The first main goal was to demonstrate the potential of a person with a disability if barriers were removed, and challenge others to do the same. And someone asked me to create a fundraising objective, because awareness is not very tangible. And so we thought, okay, $1 million. And it was so hard to start the tour. We said, oh, up it to 10. And and to be able to generate $26 million was incredible. And so it led to then, not just the end of the tour, but it was actually just the end of the beginning of a lifelong journey. And trying to be able to think about how to move things forward, because that whole tour had changed my life completely. Like, I had no idea the profound nature of the impact that it would have on me.
In that regard, when you finished, what was your first priority in terms of using that funding?
Yeah, well, my first priority was to rest and wind down, and then I was already thinking of going back into the Paralympic Games in Seoul, Korea. what a what a crazy idea that was! Yeah, I didn't realize all the things that I had to take care of, and the first priority was to ensure that that fund was put in place. And and someone said, well, we should just put it in investments, and then just give away the interest. And I said, yeah, that's a good long-term strategy, but we have to make an impact now. And so literally, we finished in May, and by September, we actually announced a $2 million disbursement, to organizations across the country, spinal cord research, at a time when people didn't even think that a cure was possible, accessibility and wheelchair sports and rehabilitation, and awareness. So we gave out these grants, and it was really awesome and it really felt meaningful that we were, the, fulfilling an obligation, to be able to, steward that fund, but also make it impact. And of course, after 10 years, we had invested it, in the Vancouver Foundation, and they were such a great organization to steward resources. The need was increasing. The interest rates were were dropping, and the yield was not moving forward. And our foundation approached me, and they said, Rick, you need to think about coming and joining us as CEO. And I said, well, what do we think we can do? Because if we're going to just manage a fund, that's just not who I am. I'm someone who goes after dreams and keeps setting the bar higher. They said, no, we want to move into, really continuing to build on that legacy. And I said, okay, I would love to do that. I'd been working as a consultant with the University of British Columbia, helping make UBC accessible, and I thought, okay, I'll do that. And so we worked together, UBC and the foundation, and started to tackle big barriers like
Mm-hmm.
like a spinal cord research center of excellence in Vancouver with endowed professor and chairs and a place at the university that would decant down and eventually have this building at the Vancouver Coastal Health Authority and have like hundreds of researchers and clinicians all working with patients, being one of the best research centers in the world. And it was a privilege to work on a big project and dream like that and have the impact be exponential. Yeah, so that those early days were pivotal. And the challenge, Tony, for me was to move from the history of being an athlete and then gaining confidence that the skills that I had acquired through living with my disability and being an athlete and then the tour were replicatable ongoing as a thought leader, as a champion to continue what was not just the end of the tour, but a life mission. And I that decision though was probably one of the biggest pivot points, because I think if I didn't do that, I wasn't ready to do that at the end of the tour. I didn't feel I was mature enough. Wasn't clear enough. But if I didn't do that, I think that the tour would have been evolved to a footnote in history, and the legacy would have atrophied, and the impact of against a much bigger need would have been much less. And so, yeah, that was a big moment, and I'm glad I had so many mentors, and advisors who are very thoughtful to help a young kid grow up and become confident and become a leader.
You all tackled accessibility head on, and you made progress. How do you think you did so far?
Oh, I thought we did really good at the end of the tour. I thought, wow,
Mm-hmm.
we overscored all of our goals, and and we're going to get there so fast. A cure is going to happen in 10 years, and the world's going to become accessible. And oh man, I was so naive. So but we have made progress, yes. And have we got there fast enough? No. And is it more complicated and challenging than I ever could have imagined? Yes. Like trying to find a cure for paralysis is one of the greatest mysteries of medical science, one of the greatest challenges. And at least now there's tactical and fundamental hope, and there's tracks where research is progressing and lives are improving and people are having more recovery, and more importantly, the science is really accelerating. And then you look over to the right, and you see examples in for those 1.3 billion people who are living with disabilities today on the planet, and aging boomers who are having many disabling conditions.
Mm-hmm.
There is great progress because attitudes are different. People are normalizing disability, like, yeah, I can have challenges, but it's not the end of my life. There's all these people out in society. You have like a Sam Sullivan who was a quadriplegic who probably in the era of the tour would have been lucky to get out of the hospital, but he lived independently. He's married to his partner. He started a adapted sailing society with the boat that Margaret Thatcher gave me, and then he ended up becoming the mayor of the city of Vancouver, and down in Korea, or no, sorry, in Turin, in Italy, and he was receiving the Olympic flag at the end of the games to
Mm-hmm.
symbolize that Vancouver was going to host the 2010 Olympic and Paralympic Games. And who would have imagined that would be possible? Like a big city mayor, a quadriplegic, but doing all the things that a mayor should do: receive the flag, spin around and make it fly, and celebrate our enthusiasm. And those things are really huge, right? Really huge. And I know that we're starting to see more examples of employment, and more examples of technology, more examples of the built environment, the things that we build. But there's still a long way to go. Still a long way, a big long way to go.
Rick, if you could give one piece of advice to a young person who comes to you, has a disability, and needs to be directed to a path that he or she understands and can undertake, what would you tell them now?
I would just say, first of all, no matter what it is, there's no question that it's difficult and challenging, that you're going to deal with, whether it be attitudes, or you're going to deal with physical challenges or barriers, maybe medical, or others. But recognize that you're not alone, that you have the ability to process the challenges, and still see, as Stan did, as Terry did, as hopefully I've done, still see the love, the beauty, and the potential inside your life today, and that you can focus on your ability and unleash that, still find purpose, and you can actually be a whole human being, and don't let anyone take that conscious process and decision making ability from you. And just go one day at a time, and it will get better. Just have hope and never give up. Because
Very
those are
inspirational.
those are the things for
Thank
me, Tony. Those are the things for me.
Mm.
Just around the corner, when I thought about giving up, there was a brighter future, and was I ever glad I didn't?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I just want to mention this because it's interesting to me. I know you had a background. You like to fish. All of a sudden, you're with the Fraser River Sturgeon Preservation Society.
Yes,
Tell me
that's
about
right.
that.
Yeah, it's one of my leadership, in my spare time, because when we're out,
No, wait a
in
minute.
light.
You don't have spare time, Rick.
Yeah. But I love getting out into the outdoors, right? And when you get out into the outdoors and you're involved in nature, you're fishing and connecting, you learn, and you realize that we have to give back. You can't keep taking. Same was what Stan kept saying in wheelchair basketball, and so I because I was raised on the banks of the Fraser and Williams Lake, and then Abbotsford, and then I live on the banks now, in Richmond, and of course our offices overlooking the Fraser River. I came to learn about the sturgeon. I was there in the maternity ward, looking through the glass window at the arrival of my firstborn daughter with incredible pride. And the guy was beside me looking at his firstborn son, and we were talking about their future. And I was so excited, about introducing her to the outdoors, to sport, to fishing, and he said, "So am I, and I love fishing." And I said, "Oh, that's awesome." He said, "Have you ever fished for sturgeon?" I said, "I've run into sturgeon on the Fraser River all my life." And he said, "Let's go out on the water." And when I did, our host, he actually told me about this prehistoric dinosaur that had been around, for 65 million years,
Mhm.
and that it was actually needing help. And so this moment inspired me to form a Fraser River Sturgeon Conservation Society, and to monitor the population and bring that story from the dark into the light, these ghosts in the water, and
Mhm.
and try to help make a difference. And so I'm passionate about that, and I believe that we can have a smart working river, but we can make good, smart decisions so that we can have a healthy river and a healthy ecosystem and healthy people. And the sturgeon are the iconic dinosaurs of that Fraser River ecosystem. They're the apex. They're amazing.
Well, I'm glad you're on our side.
Thanks. Appreciate it, Tony.
You mentioned Amanda and your family. You have 3 daughters?
Yes, I know, it's like so awesome. Emma, Alana, Rebecca, and it's the joy of my life.
Mhm.
Amanda and I are coming up to our 38th wedding anniversary, and I just feel so blessed. It puts it all in perspective, Tony.
She certainly supported you during the time you went on the marathon and everything since then. You're blessed, I believe, by Amanda.
Well, Tony, meeting Amanda in that fateful day when I crashed and dislocated my shoulder was, the beginning of a very deep relationship. I ended up trusting her to help get me back into my athletic career. We formed this bond, and she was there every step of the way on the Man of Motion tour. She was my greatest friend, advisor, confidant, and she was an incredible contributor. And if it wasn't for her, I there's no way I would have completed the tour. I mean, so I probably would have self-destructed or made some decisions about, things that were important where I had to, separate the forest for the trees. And she had tough conversations with me, and without her influence, there's no way we would have had that impact. And I am like super grateful for the privilege of being able to, fall in love and share our life together and move from the tour to our marriage to our children and now our grandchildren. And
I was going to say, you're a grandfather.
yeah, we have four grandsons, and they're special in our heart, and and it's amazing.
All right, just one final question, Rick. You reflect, as we've been doing over the last 40 years. What do you hope your legacy will be?
I hope at the first level, in anyone thinks of my story, it's an everyday Canadian who was able to respond and rise up from challenges with the support of good people and community, and was empowered to make a difference and pay it forward. I hope they think of that in my story, and it's not nothing to some sort of architected rarity that removes me from the everyday person, because that's who I am. That's where I've come from. I'll never forget that. And secondly, I hope that they understand that the legacy in terms of making a difference will be embodied by the better work of my foundation that I've set up, and the people, the board of directors, the CEO and team, and the volunteers and the champions who actually took it to the next level past Rick's life and have continued to try to change the world, and have made progress and are well poised to actually get to that dream one day. And I really am excited to know that legacy will continue, and it will be far better than I ever could have done on my own when I was here. So I'm privileged to be in that position, and I'm grateful, and I'm excited about that.
Are you proud to be a Canadian?
I am an absolute proud Canadian. And, I also, Tony, I don't take that privilege of being a Canadian lightly, and I don't take it for granted. I believe that we're in an era in our global society in this period of time where our country needs to remind itself who it is, and why we're unique. We're an experiment, a social experiment that has been established, by bringing First Nations and colonial and international views together to forge, this incredible human society that's kind, compassionate, smart, competitive, caring, and yet it's one that cares about the health of our people, the health of our environment, and the inclusive nature of our pluralistic world, and brings out the best in all of us. And I think if we don't fight for it, I don't mean in a positive way, and articulate those convening points, well, people will wonder, well, what is the difference? Is Canada just about hockey and maple syrup? I don't think so. So yeah, let's keep working for it, and again, not take it for granted.
Rick, it's been an extreme pleasure having you on the show, and good luck in your forward progress. I hope everything works out for you, that you get what you want, that you get what we need, and that you're there for us for a long, long time. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tony. All the best, and thanks for being there. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.